Hello, college football fans, and welcome once again to the SEC Yesterday and Today. I'm your host, Bird LaCroix, and this is episode 7 of our podcast. And today we're going to be taking a look at 25 years ago in college football. In our pre-guest segment, we'll have our guest on in a minute, and we'll talk about the upcoming games in the conference and the third Saturday in October, which has always been a big Saturday in college football history. But as far as that history, as far as yesterday goes, again, we're going to talk about 1992, 25 years ago in college football. Some milestones that occurred that year. The Southeastern Conference, our SEC, added South Carolina and Arkansas as members and split into 16 East and West divisions. The college football's first ever intra-conference championship game was contested between Florida and Alabama on December the 5th in Birmingham. Quite a milestone for the Southeastern Conference. One thing I found very interesting is that no school entered the season 1992 on probation. All 107 Division 1A schools were eligible for bowl games. And the Lou Groza Award was introduced on this year, 1992. It was introduced by the Palm Beach, Florida County Sports Commission to honor former Ohio State and Cleveland Browns kicker Lou Groza. Major coaching changes, there were a handful, 8 or 10, but those of great significance, I think that most of you would be interested in, is that Bill Walsh replaced Dennis Green as the head coach of the Stanford Cardinal, and Philip Fulmer replaced Johnny Majors as the head coach of the University of Tennessee. As an Auburn fan, and for Auburn fans that are listening out there, and possibly all college football fans, Pat Sullivan was replaced at Texas Christian University, TCU, by Jim Wacker. Now let's take a look at the preseason poll, the top 10 coaches poll that preceded the 1992 season. The number 1 team in the country was Miami of Florida. Number 2, the Washington Huskies. Number 3, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Number 4, the Florida State Seminoles. The Michigan Wolverines came in at number 5. The Florida Gators at number 6. Texas A&M's Aggies were 7th in the preseason college football poll, the coaches poll. Penn State number 8. The University of Alabama number 9. And the Syracuse Orangemen were the number 10 team in the preseason coaches poll preceding the 1992 season. Now, let's take a look at the final postseason poll. Not after the bowl games, but after the regular season. How the regular season ended before the bowl games were played. First of all, Miami. But second, up from 9th, was the University of Alabama. Number 3, Texas A&M. Number 4, Florida State. Number 5, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. The Colorado Buffaloes finished the regular season poll at the 6th spot, and the Michigan Wolverines were 7. The Georgia Bulldogs, number 8. Syracuse Orangemen did make it in at number 9, and the Nebraska Cornhuskers were number 10. And something that is notable about that is only 3 of the teams that were voted in the preseason poll did not make it into the final regular season poll. 7 teams out of the 10 that were voted into the top 10 in the preseason made the final regular season coaches poll. That's pretty significant. The only ones that did not make it from first poll to last regular season poll were Penn State, Florida, and the University of Washington Huskies. Let's take a look at the conference champions from that year. First of all, from the old Big East, Miami. The Hurricanes, of course. Number 1, the ACC. Florida State was the ACC champion. And, of course, the University of Alabama did defeat the University of Florida and became the Southeastern Conference champion that year, later to face Miami in the Sugar Bowl. The MAC Conference saw Bowling Green go undefeated with an 8-0 conference record and win their conference championship. And the Big Ten champion was the Michigan Wolverines. The Big Eight, the Nebraska Cornhuskers. The Southwest Conference found Texas A&M undefeated at 7-0 in the conference. and they were the champion there, the old Southwest Conference. The WAC, the Hawaii Rainbows, were tied by Brigham Young and Fresno State with 6-2 records, Hawaii ultimately coming out on top, and the Pac-10 champion, once again, the University of Washington Cougars. Now, the Heisman Trophy vote was interesting. Gino Torretta, the senior quarterback from Miami, won the Heisman Trophy. He was followed at number 2 by Marshall Faulk, and number 3, Garrison Hurst of the University of Georgia. Some significant stat leaders, Marshall Faulk of San Diego State, led the nation in rushing with 1,630 yards, an average of 6.2 yards per carry. Jimmy Klingler of the University of Houston Cougars was the number 1 receiver in the country. He was the leading passer in the country. Quarterback Jimmy Klingler of the University of Houston. He threw 504 times, completed 303 for 3,818 yards with a 60% completion rating. And the number 1 receiver as far as yardage was concerned in 1992 was Ryan Yarborough of the Wyoming Cowboys. And of course, if you follow college football closely, you'll know that the University of Alabama upset the University of Miami Hurricanes in the Sugar Bowl to become the national champion. They dismantled the Miami Hurricanes, and that was something that surprised a lot of people, but a lot of people enjoyed it, I'm sure. And so the SEC had the college football champion for the 1992 season. And now, in just a minute, we're going to bring on our special guest. But before we do, we're going to talk about the third Saturday in October for just one moment, as our guest is a big fan of the University of Tennessee. This is the third Saturday in October. We'll talk more about that with him, which holds great significance in the history of college football once again. And we'll take just a quick look at the stats from the series. Tennessee is trailing in the series. Alabama, 53 wins, Tennessee, 38 wins, and there have been 7 ties in the series. The largest margin of victory was 41-14 for Tennessee. That occurred in 1969. Alabama's largest margin of victory occurred in 1906 when they defeated the Volunteers by a score of 51-0. Tennessee's longest winning streak in the series, 7 games, 1995 through 2001, and Alabama's longest winning streak stands at 11 from 1971 through 1981, and I do believe the University of Alabama is on a current 10-game winning streak in the third Saturday of October series. Okay, now we'll bring on our guest, Mike Loveall, and we'll talk a little bit about this third Saturday in October, the upcoming game, and predict the other games in the conference that are going to take place this Saturday. Mike was a previous guest on our program earlier in the season when the Florida Gators played his Tennessee Volunteers, and we're just really tickled to have him on again. Mike is the managing editor of The Last Word on Sports. So welcome to the program once again, Mike Loveall. Hello, Mike. How are you doing tonight?
Bert, I'm doing great. As always, it's a pleasure to join you.
Well, I appreciate you coming back and joining us again. It's great to talk to somebody that knows football like you do, and that the Southeastern Conference and Alabama and Tennessee coming up this weekend. And before we get to that, though, this Saturday will be October 21st. It will be the third Saturday in October. We're going to get heavy into that in a moment. But before we do, let's just slip back and talk about just a few minutes about our disappointing weekends that we had last weekend, both Tennessee and Auburn. So I'll let you lead on that and tell me a little bit about what you feel is going on at Tennessee and where this thing may lead.
Well, for Tennessee fans, last week wasn't good. For the second year in a row, Tennessee loses to an outmanned South Carolina team off of a bye week. It was even worse this year. South Carolina had 3 of their 5 offensive linemen out, their best receiver out, lost their best running back early in the game. So it was just very disheartening to see that Tennessee's offensive woes continue. 3 good drives to start the game, ending only in field goals, and then couldn't punch it in on the last drive of the game. It was really the culmination of a lot of frustration for the first half of the season, and of course, with Alabama coming up, it's only going to get worse. We had the 41-0 worst home loss in, I believe, 100 years, 2 weeks before Georgia. We have the bye week, and we come out and just lay another egg against South Carolina. Here's the worst part about the South Carolina game, and in all due respect to South Carolina because they deserve the win, but if you look at those two sidelines, there's far more talent in Orange than there was in Garnett. And for Tennessee fans, just to see the team come out and execute poorly, a lot of false start penalties, a lot of unnecessary penalties, a lot of missed assignments, to see that much talent played at that low of a level, that's really what's killing Tennessee fans. It's one thing if you have a mediocre team play mediocre, but when you have a talented team play subpar, that's really what wears at Tennessee fans.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. The same thing, similar thing happened to us, and everybody was pretty confident. We went down to Louisiana, and spent the night in New Orleans, got up, took the bus over to Baton Rouge. It's a party. We're having a big time. Nobody has any inkling that we absolutely will lose this football game. It was possible. Sure, it was possible, but the fact of the matter is Auburn has better players. Auburn has better depth. And evidently Auburn didn't have a better coaching, though, on Saturday. That was one thing. But they lined up in there, got a lead, sat on it, and, well, you know what happened. I think like everybody does. And they let LSU back in the ball game, didn't score a point in the second half. And lo and behold, you on the verge of being able to push on into the second half of the season and really do something potentially special, then you find yourself scratching your head and wondering what just in the world happened. So I feel your pain.
After the week before, if you use the transitive property of college football, Auburn's not even the best team in Southeast Alabama anymore. Troy is.
Troy, you tell me all about it. And I graduated from Troy. I started at Auburn, but I wound up finishing there. And that was one of the things. And Albie, our mascot tiger, dressed up like a Trojan horse at one time during the game. He was trying to have a little fun with it, but it was after a 20-0 lead.
Yes.
It's just the wheels came off and they couldn't do anything right. LSU gained confidence, and congratulations to LSU. That's the way the ball bouncing, isn't it, my friend?
Well, Troy's about an hour from Auburn? Not even.
Troy from Auburn is go down Highway 29 or into Montgomery and out 231. It's about an hour and a half.
Okay.
Yeah. And not far down the road. And Neil Brown, is building a good program down
sure
there.
Is.
At Troy, and he's going to be a hot commodity. And it appears there just might be. Wow, it's hard to believe. There might be several openings in the SEC if things keep going like they are. What do you think about that?
Well, I think Neil Brown's going to definitely get a few calls this year. I think certainly at Tennessee there's going to be a vacancy, possibly at Auburn. I don't know. Possibly at Arkansas. I'm not sure.
Possibly at Arkansas.
Looks like Kevin Sumlin has probably weathered that ship, so I think he's going to be okay. Even with back-to-back SEC East titles, probably not going to get one this year, but, Florida fans are not happy with Jim McElwain. That just kind of shows you the level of expectation in this conference.
It's madness, really. But that is the given reality that we live in the world of college football right now.
The bottom line is if you get paid $4 million a year, people expect you to do a $4 million performance.
To produce, and everybody cannot win. And it causes turnover. And here, Gus is teetering, but Auburn still has the opportunity, like we say, to meet all the goals that were set in the beginning of the season. They control their own destiny, but they have to win out. And I don't see that happening, so it's going to get interesting. And how do you think the Tennessee season might play out?
Well, I really think Tennessee is staring a 6-6 season in the face. You look at Alabama, and there's really, I don't think I don't think anybody has any real hopes of victory there. So that'll put Tennessee at 3-4. You get Southern Miss. Certainly you barely beat Massachusetts. So Southern Miss is not a give me. It's definitely a game they should win. So that'll put you at 4-4. And then you got LSU, Kentucky, Missouri, Vanderbilt left on the schedule. You got to think they probably drop the LSU game. They probably win the Missouri game. So that's 5-5. So to get to 6 wins, it looks like you're going to have to take care of business against Southern Miss, and you're going to have to split either Kentucky or Vanderbilt. Both teams are better this year than they were last year. Both teams are better than they historically are. So Tennessee's going to have to play, and Tennessee's going to have to fight and claw their way to a 6-6 season. That's kind of what it looks like right now.
Yeah, it doesn't. The November doesn't look as rosy as it has in years past for Tennessee.
No, for the 80s and for the 80s and 90s, Tennessee had a great November schedule. You always had Kentucky, always had Vanderbilt. I think in my lifetime, so I'm 39-ish. I think we've lost to Vanderbilt and Kentucky maybe 5 times total in my life. So you always had those 2 wins, and then usually you have the lesser opponents. We historically played Florida early, historically played Georgia early, historically played Alabama, obviously third Saturday in October. But historically, our schedule, or at least in the last 3 generations, our schedule after Alabama has been much more favorable than before Alabama.
Yeah, and speaking of Alabama, here it is this Saturday, the third Saturday in October, and I don't know if especially younger college football fans really understand the significance of the third Saturday in October and what a huge game this has been historically. Now, Tennessee has fallen on hard times lately, and it's not the rivalry, the vibrant rivalry we would all like to see. But can you give us a little bit of history on this series and explain a little bit more about it?
Yeah, sure. Would love to. You know, the series started 1901. This would actually be the 100th meeting between Tennessee and Alabama. Alabama, with every team that they've played more than, I think, 5 times, leads the series 54-38 to 7 in Alabama's favor. Here's a little trivia question for you. Tennessee has the most wins of any opponent in history against Alabama. No team has beaten Alabama more than Tennessee has. So that kind of, when we talk about the 2 teams, when we talk about the on-the-field rivalry, that kind of drives that. For Tennessee fans, Alabama has always been the team that Tennessee couldn't get over. Tennessee is second in every statistical category in the SEC. Total wins, conference championships, bowl wins, bowl appearances. Second in every category, every meaningful statistical category to Alabama. Alabama is the only team. So Tennessee fans have always thought, if there wasn't Alabama, we would be one of the 4 or 5 top programs in the nation. As it is, it would kind of be hard to make an argument that Tennessee's out of the top 10 nationally from a historical perspective. But they've always played second fiddle in the SEC to Alabama. So that's what kind of drives the rivalry with Tennessee fans. For Alabama fans, the history of it, Tennessee being kind of their big performance rival, maybe not geographic rival, but performance rival. So there's a lot of history there. This will be the 100th meeting. Like I said, Alabama leaves it. But there's history beyond that. There's actually some cultural history there, too. If you look at 2 of the great coaches of all time squared off in this the rivalry several times, Bear Bryant has often said that he learned so much from General Neyland, Tennessee's coach. I think he's been quoted as saying he learned everything he knows about football from General Neyland. That was probably being very generous, but he had a tremendous amount of respect for Coach Neyland. He had as much respect for Coach Neyland as he had for any other coach in college football. So that's saying a lot. So you look at 2 of the Coach Neyland was probably the greatest defensive mind in the history of college football. A lot of people don't realize that because he coached so many years ago. But you look at 2 of the giants of coaching in college football, Robert Neyland and Bear Bryant. So they're obviously in this rivalry, the 2 big cornerstone coaches in this rivalry. So there's that. There's some cultural components here too. If you've ever seen the show or the production The Color Orange on ESPN, it's ESPN Short, I think, or SEC Network 30 for 30 or something like that. It talks about the story of Condredge Holloway, the famous Tennessee quarterback. He wanted to play at Alabama. Bear Bryant said, "You can come play, but you can't be a quarterback because you're African American, and Alabama's not ready for an African American quarterback." So he went to Tennessee. Tennessee said, "Yeah, you can play quarterback." He became the SEC's first starting African American quarterback. And I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but I believe Bear Bryant at some point was quoted as saying, of all the losses he's ever had, that was the only one he was okay with, or something like that. He come across and he made it a point to shake Condredge Holloway's hands after the Holloway-led Tennessee team beat Alabama that year. So there's some great stuff there. If you even go back even further, there's the Richmond Flowers story. His dad was the Attorney General of Alabama. Wanted to play football at Alabama, couldn't because his dad was the Attorney General who segregated the Alabama University system. So he went to Knoxville, became an All-American kick returner. If you look at Forrest Gump's character in Forrest Gump, the football version was actually based on Richmond Flowers because he was an All-American kickoff returner, and that's why the clip in the movie is Alabama versus Tennessee, because Richmond Flowers played at Tennessee.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's like everything in that movie, that's loosely based on the Richmond Flowers saga. So there's cultural history there, and then a little bit more recent history. You have Johnny Majors coming over from Pittsburgh back to his alma mater at Tennessee. 1982, Bear Bryant's last game at Neyland Stadium. Tennessee wins, kind of Johnny Majors' first big signature victory at his alma mater. His players are carrying him off, so there's the iconic picture of Johnny Majors on, above Bear Bryant, shaking Bear Bryant's hand as he leaves Neyland Stadium for the last time. So there's a lot of history here, albeit a lot of it's kind of older history. The rivalry's been one-sided lately, but Tennessee won, I think 8 straight in the 90s, and a lot of consternation there in Alabama about losing so much to Tennessee. And that was kind of the joke in Tennessee, that Johnny Majors got fired because he couldn't beat Alabama, and then Phil Fulmer got fired because he couldn't beat Florida. Now, if we just find a coach who can beat Florida and Alabama, they'd have great job security. So Tennessee had their run in the 90s, and I think Alabama's on 10 straight right now, probably make it 11 straight, which would be the tie for the longest streak in the series. So a very historic rivalry. Like you said, it's kind of lost a little bit of its luster in today's day and age where people have a very short memory. They only remember 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. They don't consider the 80s, the 70s, the 60s, the 40s. But if you look at the whole 100 years of this rivalry, it's a tremendous rivalry. One of the great ones in college football. It just doesn't kind of have the marquee today that it has over history.
Now, before we go into our predictions, is there any one game in particular that you remember in the series that brought you the most joy, that you got the most excited about beating Alabama, and then there's one that you particularly remember that caused you the most pain?
The most pain. So my favorite one was the first one I went to. I was in Birmingham. Went to the 1995 game in Birmingham. Peyton Manning starts the game off with an 88-yard touchdown pass. I believe Tennessee goes on to win 41-14. So that was my first Tennessee-Alabama game. And
largest win in this, largest margin of victory in the series
for Tennessee. Yes, for Tennessee, and so that was a great experience. That was my first Tennessee-Alabama game actually, and it was there in the old Legion Field there in Birmingham, Alabama. Glad that was the only game I've ever seen there. But
I've seen a lot of painful ones there.
Yeah, so that's probably my favorite memory. As far as disappointments, I mean, there's been so many. There was a 12-9 game. I believe that was 1990. It was just field goal after field goal. Tennessee really should have won that game.
They had a better team.
They did have a better team. There was the one Lane Kiffin's year, so 5 plus 3, 8, 9 years ago. Tennessee, Lane Kiffin comes in. Tennessee has a chance to kick a game-winning field goal to beat top-ranked Alabama. Terrence Cody blocks it. The ball is still in the air after he blocks it. He takes off his helmet, which should have been an automatic by rule. By rule is a 15-yard penalty. Of course, it was a defensive penalty, so it would have been one more untimed down. Tennessee would have got shot 15 yards closer. The refs completely bungled it, missed it. So another opportunity that we let fly by the wayside. The disappointments from Tennessee fans' perspectives in this series is there's a lot of games that we could have won, that we should have won. Of course, I know every fan says this, but that we could have won, that we should have won, that was there for the taking. We just kind of fumbled it away and gave it to Alabama. And when you're playing a team that's consistently as good as Alabama, you got to take advantage of the games that you can win and you should win. So this series really, instead of being 54-38, should be more like 45-40. It really should be much closer than what it is. But Tennessee fans Tennessee has over the years consistently found ways to let it slip by.
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear on that. And we'll get into the prediction of that one lastly. So let's go ahead and start with some other games. And there are a few byes this weekend. Florida doesn't play. Georgia doesn't play. South Carolina does not play. Texas A&M does not play, and neither do the Vanderbilt Commodores. So let's see who is playing this weekend. How about Kentucky and Mississippi State in Starkville?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting game. Mississippi State's actually favored by 10.5. I finally believe in Kentucky. I think it's several years, but I think Mark Stoops has taken advantage of a weak SEC East. I think he's got the Wildcats to a level where they can compete in the SEC. My worry about Mississippi State is they're too one-dimensional on offense. Even with a Kentucky defense that's probably not ready for prime time, and even with Nick Fitzgerald being a great running quarterback, I don't think they're quite a 10.5-point favorite. I think Kentucky's motivated. I think they're really upset after that Florida loss. I think it's an upset that's going to motivate them, not an upset that's going to get them down. So I think they're going to. I think for the first time in a long time, they're going to finish the season strong. I think it starts here. I got Kentucky winning this one, 31-28.
Okay, and I have debated this one in my mind also, Mike. And the only thing I can come up with is Mississippi State's playing at home, and I think they'll find some way to win in Starkville, and that's about all I got on that one. Now let's go to possibly one of the gimmies for the weekend. Missouri is hosting Idaho.
Yeah, I think Missouri coming in, starting to get a little bit of momentum. They played well against Georgia. Drew Lock had a pretty good passing game against Georgia. Very tough defense there. They absolutely looked better against Georgia's defense than Tennessee did. Idaho is not going to really do too much, but again, Missouri's got a lot of questions from the first half of the season. I think Missouri probably puts up 35 against Idaho. Idaho probably gets 17. I'd look at 35-17. I don't think this is going to be a blowout, but I still think Missouri is going to use this game as an opportunity to build on a little bit of momentum from keeping the game close against Georgia for a half. But if that Missouri offense ever gets in gear, they can actually put up some points. I think their question mark is on defense and execution on the offensive side of the ball. So I like Missouri to kind of continue to build a little bit of momentum heading into the second half of the season. I'd go 35-17.
Yeah, Missouri could. They need to build a little momentum. They got some opportunities here in the second half. They've got UConn, Arkansas, Vanderbilt, winnable ball games, and of course they got Florida and Tennessee too. So we'll see what happens there. But let's go now to Oxford, Mississippi, with LSU coming off of a big win over my Auburn Tigers. They're traveling up to Oxford to play Ole Miss. What you got there?
Yeah, Ole Miss putting 50 on Vanderbilt last week was probably the biggest surprise of the week. So, I think, I saw Shea Patterson here at the Army All-American Bowl the year that they had Patterson, Felipe Franks, and Jacob Eason. And he, to me, watching a couple of practices in the game, he was by far better than both of those guys. So I like Shea Patterson. I think he's going to do great. He's had a great season, very quietly a great season there. Unfortunately, Ole Miss has nothing else. And, I think LSU is kind of getting some momentum, getting into rhythm. That defense, I think is athletic enough to pressure Patterson. And without Ole Miss having a sustained rushing attack, the LSU front four are going to be able to pin their ears back and really go after Patterson. He's a young guy, so I would expect to see quite a bit of blitzing from Dave Aranda, and they have enough skill on the back end to man up and play man-to-man coverage to allow heavy blitzing. So I think LSU wins this game. I think it's going to be probably 24-17. I'm still not sold on LSU's offense. Danny Etling did better last week, but what I'm looking for from LSU is consistency. They've got a ton of talent there, but they need to be consistent. They need to be consistent every down, every series, every game. They just need consistency, and they'll be a pretty good team.
Yeah, I think they will. They have that potential now. They've got they got by Florida and Gainesville, then took Auburn and Baton Rouge. So one way you can look at it is that they got a tremendous amount of confidence and momentum built up. On the other hand, I think the LSU people were as surprised they won that ball game last weekend as anybody, and they were just getting ready to leave the game. They didn't show up in great numbers to begin with, and it got to 20-0. They were ready to leave, and all of a sudden things started happening. So I'm wondering if they spent their emotion and they will come up flat against Ole Miss and Oxford. But I'm going to go with the momentum and take LSU also. So now that gives us the other half of the equation. Auburn having to travel to Fayetteville to beat attempt to beat an Arkansas team that's really struggling. And what do you think on that?
Yeah, Arkansas is struggling. Got some injury questions there at quarterback. Haven't really had the run dominance that they usually have. The offensive line is not playing up to their normal level of excellence. Defense is kind of in they're not in shambles. Defense is kind of middling, playing mediocre. Auburn's one of those teams. I see Auburn and I see everybody they have. Cameron Petway, very good defensive front. I just wonder why they're not playing better than what they are. The offense should be putting up a lot more points. So bottom line is, I think Auburn goes on the road. I think being on the road is good for them. Get away from some distractions, get in the hotel, being with each other. Having said that, they were on the road last week. They started out well. Really what I'm looking for Auburn, I think Auburn starts out well. I think they score some points. I'm looking for the play calling in the second half not to get conservative. I think Gus Malzahn coaches better, and I think Auburn plays better when they're trying to score 60 points instead of just trying to hold on to the win. So that's what I'm going to be looking at. I think Auburn wins this game. I think they get back on track. I think it's 35-20. That's what I'm looking at, Auburn over Arkansas.
Yeah, I was so downcast about it at the beginning of the week. I was thinking, well, gosh, what are we going to do now? They're on to us. We're going to go out there. Arkansas sees this as an opportunity to win. We could just go into a downspin here, but Auburn does once again this week have a better team, and Arkansas is not the team LSU was, and they should be able to get their focus back on and win the ball game. I saw where somebody predicted that as the lock of the week, Auburn minus 15. I wouldn't. It could happen. It could be a blowout. I don't think Arkansas is probably thinking about that 56-3 deal down in Auburn last year too as a little bit of motivation. But I do see now that I've been able to put things in perspective a little bit more, I think that Auburn will do what it takes to rebound and win by a couple of touchdowns. And that brings us to our final game, the third Saturday in October, Tennessee versus Alabama in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, I don't know where to start here. Tennessee's offense hasn't executed well all season long, really. I think Jarrett Guarantano gives Tennessee's offense a little bit more athleticism with his ability to run the ball on the edge. That's gonna slow down Alabama's front seven a little bit, but they're so big and so fast. They're so athletic that I don't think that's going to cause them too much of a problem. Our defense just doesn't have the depth. I like Alabama to pour it on in the second half. I really think this is not. I don't think this is going to be pretty for Tennessee. I really think Alabama is going to be in the 50s, and I'll be surprised if Tennessee scores more than 10. I'm really thinking it's going to be like 56-10.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm thinking it's going to look a little more like last year. Too, you would like to see a great game. It's a CBS feature game of the week, but the reality tells us otherwise unless something just completely came out of nowhere. But I see Alabama winning and winning big, probably covering the what is it, like 30?
Last I saw today is 35.5. It's anywhere between 34.5 and 35.5. Tennessee's largest spread, the biggest underdog spread Tennessee's ever had on the books in Vegas.
My gosh, that's hard to imagine. Who would have ever thought it? But, that's the lineup we got for this weekend, folks. And once again, we do appreciate so much Mike Loveall from Last Word in Sports coming out and visiting with us again today. And, Mike, if you don't mind, tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah, Bert, it's always a pleasure joining you. You can find my articles at lastwordoncollegefootball.com. Check us out there. We have a weekly top 25 that kind of ranks all the teams. I write about Tennessee and some SEC and national topics as well. Again, lastwordoncollegefootball.com. We kind of give, we try to think of ourselves as giving some not the hot take perspective, but sound research, reasoning for the informed and smart sports fan. That's kind of our little niche in the world. Lastwordoncollegefootball.com.
And once again, you can find me on Twitter at AUTULL Auto. My personal website with sports and personal blogs is birdlacroix.com. I have columns appearing at Campus Press Box, and this podcast, of course, is mine, and it's a subsidiary of Campus Press Box, Sports Hacks, and you can find our podcast there, the SEC, yesterday and today. This has been episode 7, and we appreciate you people listening. Take care out there, and be sure to love your neighbor.